welcome to the Art of Being Human. We've been talking about different types of anxiety, and I've gone through various kinds, like generalized anxiety disorder, OCD. I want to start off by reading something to you that I found on the internet. It's not long, but I think it's interesting. There are very few things in life for children that are more anxiety prone than taking tests. And you know, every 3 or 4 years in elementary school, tests are taken on aptitude, on intelligence, and general knowledge to see how the students are how they are coming along and how they are gaining in their knowledge. And in high school, there are certain tests that are given every year or two in terms of college preparation. So if you get a good score in the ACT test and all of these tests that are given, and I've given them too, it's something that happens. But there is a principal in a high school that wrote to the parents of all the high school students who are going to be taking these tests because they occur routinely. And this is what he says, and I think he's got a point, and I'm just relating this to you since exams are so anxiety-producing. It says to parents, the exams of your children are to start soon. Remember, among the students that are sitting for the exams, there is one artist who doesn't need to understand math. There is an entrepreneur who doesn't care about history. There's a musician whose chemistry marks won't make any difference. There is an athlete whose physical fitness is more important than physics. If your child gets top marks, great. But if not, don't take away their self-confidence or dignity. It's just an exam. They are cut out for much bigger things in life. Tell them you love them and will not judge them. When you do, watch your children conquer the world. Don't think that doctors and engineers are the only happy people in the world. Now, I mention this to you because there are so many students that have anxiety in test taking, not just in the general tests that a lot of people take, that have to take every 2 or 3 years, but in a test for their classes. I had a student, I was teaching science. I love science, and I taught a lot of freshman students science. And this girl, she seemed to be pretty intelligent, and suddenly she was getting failing grades, low Ds, and I didn't understand why, because I thought that she was understanding the material pretty well. So finally, of her own accord, through no suggestion of mine, but I'm glad she did it, she came to me one day and she said to me, I want you to know that I know the material for this test, even though I'm going to flunk it. What an unusual thing for a high school student to say, but I'm glad she did what she did. And I said, well, very well, let's talk. And we sat down, and we just talked in a general sense, and every so often I'd throw her a question that would be like one that would be on the test. She'd always get it right. She knew what I was doing, and she knew that she knew the material, and I knew that she knew the material as well. So what I said, this is a true story, by the way, I'm not making it up. I got up my rank book and I said, you just passed the test with an A. And she couldn't believe it. I says, you got an A because I know that you know the material. And that's what the test is for, isn't it? To find out if you know what I'm teaching. You know perfectly well what I'm teaching. There's no reason why you shouldn't get an A. And I marked it out in the rank book, and I showed it to her. And then I said, I want you to go in class this afternoon. It was an early afternoon class. And I said, I want you to take the test, but don't worry about your grade. Even if you get them all wrong, I'll still give you an A because that's what you deserve. So she went in, and I had told her, just try to relax when you're taking the test, and you can do it because you already know what your final score is going to be. It's going to be an A. So she took it, she got another A. She learned to relax on the test, and from that point on, she never had a problem with tests again. She was always a very high B or A in her scores. And what I had done was to tell her that she had anxiety over the test. She knew the material. If she could learn to relax and let her knowledge flow through, she could get a good grade. Now, I wished I could do that with every student I had, but it was impossible time-wise to do that. And some students didn't have that kind of a problem anyway, but this was her problem. And so, I really believe that if you are going to school, you need to learn as much as you can. You need to work as hard as you can. There's no reason to go to school if you're not there to learn. But on the other hand, if anxiety prevents you from doing well on a test, even if you know the material, then you need to talk to somebody about it and get some help with it, because that shouldn't impede your development. And what if you just don't like tests, you don't care? There are other things for you. Not everybody is made to go to college. Not everybody needs a college degree. Some of the best people who do the most creative work don't have college degrees. But I'm not talking against college. College is obscenely expensive. And if a person isn't interested, they can be interested in other kinds of things, in other kinds of training, to get in other kinds of careers that doesn't require a 4-year, a 6-year, or an 8-year education degree. You get your basics in 4 years, but then you go on for the master's, which is another 1 to 2 years, and then you go on for the PhD or something else that's like a PhD. But not all people are geared for it. So if your anxiety is based upon you have to have an education, get the education that you can, try to relax with it. Now I'm going back for a moment to OCD because I didn't quite finish what I was talking about. Obsessive thoughts are the cause of OCD. These thoughts are always negative. And then what the behavior is, all of these controlled kind of funny behaviors that people have, it's to try to control the obsessive thoughts. You may not be consciously aware of all the obsessive thoughts that you have, but even if you have, your mind is making an attempt to block those off by the behaviors that you go through, like washing your hands 15 times a day, or buttoning your sweater a certain way, or walking on a sidewalk and your right foot has to go on every crack but not your left. And there are all kinds of them. You have to put the salt shaker just exactly where it needs to go in your cabinet, in the kitchen. And if you put it in another place, you've got to go back to the kitchen and fix that because it seems like it's a crime and you have to do it. All to try to control the obsessive thoughts that you do not have control of. So here are some of the symptoms of obsessive compulsive disorder, although I think I've described them pretty well. You have to check things over and over again. Did I lock the car? Did I shut the door? Did I close did I make sure that the oven was off? All of these things. Everything has to be done the same way. You tend to count things. 3 steps forward, 1 back, then you can take your walk, whatever it is. There's a preoccupation with ritual, and you have to have things the same way all the time. You have cluttered living spaces. A lot of people with OCD have cluttered living places. They have trouble throwing things away. They keep stacks of magazines, even though the magazines are outdated. Someday they'll get a chance to read them. Who knows? But just in case, there they are, piling high, up and through the windows and up to the ceilings. And people do have stacks of magazines that go up beyond their window space. Keeping stacks of magazines, moving things without actually discarding them. Oh, I gotta have more order in here. So instead of throwing something away, you just take and you move it around. But you still have the same things. And acquiring useless things and not wanting to throw these useless things away. There's also procrastination, the inability to make decisions. It's just too hard. Do I save it? Do I keep it? Or do I throw it away? Do I go here? Do I go there? I can't make up my mind. Just not being able to make decisions, not being able to organize items, and perfectionism. This has got to be perfect. If it's not perfect, I have to do it again and again. And there's too much attachment to possessions, not a way of letting go of things, and very little social interaction. In other words, you are socially interacting with your things, the things that you're keeping, the things that you're collecting, the things that you may be hoarding, when you really need to clear out. You need to clear out space. Now, some people feel that hoarding There are shows on television about hoarding where there's no place to even walk, there's no place to even sleep. There's stuff everywhere, and you have a little space on a couch or someplace where you can lay down and sleep. Very unhealthy. But some people feel that the hoarding is a type of OCD, but it may be, it may not be, but it's been thought, people who make the DSM-3s and they have to do a diagnosis and they arrange diagnoses, they are thinking in terms of making hoarding a diagnosis on its own. Others are thinking that it's a form of OCD, collecting things, keeping things, organizing things as best that you can, even though things are really cluttered and you're not really organizing. All of this is a type of OCD behavior, trying to control obsessive thoughts that are overpowering, not being able to control those obsessive thoughts, and doing different kinds of procedures and different kinds of things that you do every day over and over and over again, just to try to control those obsessive thoughts. Well, what about PTSD? PTSD stands for post-traumatic stress disorder. What happens in PTSD is that you have had traumatic events happening to you over and over again, or maybe one big traumatic event that only happened once, or you have seen a traumatic event happen to somebody else, either over and over again or even once. You may have seen a bad accident and suddenly you get PTSD, even though you weren't involved with the accident. So you have either seen some kind of a traumatic event or have been a part of a traumatic event, even once or sometimes many times, especially if it's abuse, and you have post-traumatic stress. And you just relive that memory over and over and over again. If you've been to war as a soldier, you may have come back with PTSD. You can't get it out of your mind. It's there, and you just can't get it out of your mind. And you have flashbacks, and you relive this over and over again. It can be very, very debilitating, but also it is treatable. Those flashbacks are so powerful that they take on a life of their own. If you ever thought, if you think about something that's happened to you and it's been frightening, years later you may still be thinking about that thing that was frightening. Why haven't you gotten rid of it? Why have you not been able to shed the memory? Well, the idea is that there's a part of the brain that stores memories of things that have happened to you, good things, bad things, all kinds of things. But the things that it stores, you remember not only the event, but you remember the emotions that went with the event. I mean, if you were in an airplane crash and you were simply terrified, you didn't think you were going to make your way, you thought you were going to die in the crash, then what happens? It comes back. Not just the memory of the crash, but the feelings that you had at the time that it happened. And those feelings can be very traumatic and very strong. It's like they take on a life of their own. So you are reliving not only the event that happened, you are reliving the emotions that went with the event that happened. And so you have the same kinds of feelings of horror and the same kinds of fears as well as the event memory, and they pair together. It's like you don't get rid of it. That's a brain thing. Now, a lot of people, the memories get less and less, and they remember it, but it doesn't become haunting for them. But there are other people that it becomes very haunting for them because they re-experience all the emotions that they had at the time. So they're just as fearful. If you're afraid, and this gets back to phobia, if you're afraid of crossing a bridge because you have a phobia of it, even getting close to a bridge brings back the feelings of terror that you had when you started having that phobia to begin with. And you remember the terror that you had when the bridge was rumbling and you thought you were going to die in it. or something like that. So at any rate, as I said before, some of these kinds of phobias and some of these kinds of anxiety kind of blend together. Well, this is what it is. And here are the symptoms of the post-traumatic stress disorder. You startle easily. You are numb emotionally. You know, you just don't, for ordinary living, you kind of numb. You numb out. You know, you're not excited about anything. You're not distressed by anything. You're just going through the motions. You're isolated from your loved ones, or you have a fear of that. There's not much intimacy in your life. You become irritable. You are aggressive. You are hostile and violent, or you can be. You avoid situations that remind you of the event that you went through. That means you can develop a phobia out of this, and you won't go to anything that reminds you of what you went through. And there are problems in the anniversary of the event, the day that it happened, maybe 10 years later, and you're remembering it still, it's a problem. And you refuse to talk about the event due to the fears of getting a flashback. Flashbacks are very, very terrible. There's a fear that you have lost your mind. Now, 40 million people have it, and so what can you do to help yourself? Well, of course, you need to seek out professional help. But if you can think of it as something other than yourself, this happened, but it's no longer a part of me. It's no longer a part of me. It's way back in history, and I can remember the event, but I don't have to bother with the things that surrounded it. I don't have to bother with the emotions. If you can talk yourself out of having it as integrally a part of you, that may help. You may have symptoms, but you don't have to describe yourself as having this, as being connected with the event that you went through. So it's a very difficult thing to go through that, and you have to have professional help with it. But that's what happens in PTSD. You remember and you never forget. There are ways of treating that. And if you go to a professional person, they have ways of desensitizing you to that, and I don't want to get into that here because this is not a therapy class. I just want to point you in the right direction to have help. And that's the way you do it. You can have the help that you need by going to the professional and getting help. There's a new kind of therapy called havening that some people use, and it helps them with it. And I'm not going to go through the process of it here, but it's non-invasive. You look certain ways, you have somebody stroke your arm, or you stroke yourself, or you rub your hand across your forehead, and you look in a certain way. I mean, it's all to break up that pattern of, I have the fear, this is what happened, kind of thing. And so it's a great help to go through that. If you wanted to look online, you probably could find havening, and it would probably describe the process. As I said, I know what the process is, but I don't want to give you therapy here. I just want to point you in the right direction for help. These anxiety disorders are very, very difficult to go through, and you do need to have help with them if they're too much for you. But you just, the fears are terrifying. In all of them, there is a fear of abandonment. That is, you're not going to be able to get help because you've been abandoned. Somehow you've got to go through it alone. And there's a fear of being ostracized due to the symptoms. People won't want to be with you because you have symptoms, so therefore they'll leave you alone. So the feeling of aloneness, the feeling of abandonment, and the feeling of not being able to get help and going through your symptoms alone, that's all a part of the process of the anxiety, and that's all the process of what you have to deal with. Now, I want to go just into something else briefly. I think I have time for it. I have a couple of pictures here. We do perhaps have problems because of the fact of our technology. It may well be that technology gives us fear. And so I want to show you a couple of pictures here, this starting the first one. There is a new disorder, and it's called text neck. What is text neck? Well, if you do your phones like most people do. You hunch over, you lean over, your head is down. Some people write that way, some people read that way, but it seems to be a disorder of young people when they are doing all their phones, and what they develop is something like a horn-like spike in the back of their necks, really of their cranium. Let me take this down. I have another one to show you. Text neck is what it's called. Now, what happens to our skull when we have text neck? You can see this is an enlargement of that picture I had on before. Here is your spinal column right here. Here is your skull right here. Right in the back of the skull is this little pointy thing. There's a little arrow there, and it's right here, above where the pointer is. That is a projection. It's a spike. It's like some kind of a bony structure that is growing out of the skull just above the neck. It's on the back of the skull as a result of your hunching over and you're looking at your phones all the time. And what happens is that the skull is growing a spike kind of thing, and it's like a horn-like spike at the back of the skull due to the position of your head when you're so many hours on the phone or looking at your phone or looking at your tablet, whatever it is. This is not considered to be healthy. This is a disruption and a disorientation of the skull. It's considered to be an illness. It's a growth. I'm going to read this off to you from the article. It's a growth in younger adults. It points to shifting body posture brought about by the use of modern technology. Smartphones and other handheld devices are contorting the human form, requiring users to bend their heads forward to make sense of what's happening on the screen. And the research is throughout the nation, but basically in Australia, have documented the prevalence of a bone-like spur at the back of the skull among young adults. And it's there, and if you have it, you can usually reach back and you can feel it. It comes from years of hunching forward and looking at your phone or tablet. It's considered to be something which is not healthy. It's considered to be a deterioration of the skull. And what that requires is treatment, because what you're going to have as a result of that is headaches. Your alignment of your skull with the spinal cord is not going to be right. That requires adjustments, and it seems to be prevalent among young adults who have spent a lot of their childhood years as well as the young adult years looking over a phone. So how much should you be looking over your phone? You're going to really disorient your skull. You're going to have a problem with your skull. Now, how many times are we angry at our tablets because they're not working right? We can't get in what we're supposed to get in, and we're very angry at it, but we spend more and more time with our tablets, and as a result of that, we could get some kind of a deterioration of the skull. I know that I write like that. You know, I have an apartment that's small. I made myself a little desk out of foam board. I'm leaning over and I'm writing notes for sermons and whatever else that I'm doing. And my sister says, you're ruining your posture. Your posture isn't right because you spend so much time writing like that. If you go to a doctor for an eye exam, they'll say sometimes, hold this out the way you would if you were reading, like 15 inches or whatever, and see how the glasses look. Can you get things into focus? But who reads like that? I don't see anyone ever holding something up in front of themselves and reading. The only time they're holding their heads up will be if the computer screen requires them to. So we do have problems, sometimes health problems. I don't know how much anxiety this leads to, but there is a lot of anxiety that comes from our using only tablets, especially if they're not working right. So we are coming to a close. I just wanted to bring that to your attention. We'll continue with anxiety and how to help it next time. Please join me then.